welcome to this virtual meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. The first item on the agenda is welcome and introductions. So I'm pleased that we are once again able to convene. I, as ever, leave each of you in charge of your own safety information. Do we have any apologies for absence, Lucy or Joe?
None, Chair. Everyone we were expecting is here, so no other apologies.
Okay, thank you. Members, do I have any declarations of interest in respect of items that are on the agenda? No? Okay, item 4, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 8th of July to be considered for approval. Everybody happy that I take those as a correct record? Yeah. Anybody to the contrary? No? Okay, thank you. I've no specific chair's business other than to say under item 6 public forum that I propose for ease of those taking part that we'll take all the public forum items in one go rather than have people coming to the waiting room at different stages and having to hang around and all the complexities that brings us. So we have, and members should have had circulated questions and statements, and I see Suzanne Audrey is with us. Suzanne, welcome. You're muted at the moment. Yeah. Oh, now you're there.
No, so, you can hear me, but I don't think you can see me.
We can't. No.
Yeah.
We can't.
Is that okay if you can't see me?
That's fine. That's
okay,
fine. We know you're there. I presume you've seen the answers that officers have given to your 2 questions.
Well, yeah. So I looked there was the COVID recovery plan. Yes. So am I allowed a follow up to that?
You're allowed a supplementary to each of those, although the officers to answer them may not be available, but we can pursue those answers for you.
Okay. Can it just be pushed up a teeny bit? I can't quite see the answer on the screen. That's lovely. Thank you very much. So I was a bit confused about this because although there were 2 lines, one relating to leisure centres and swimming pools and the other relating to art galleries and museums. And there was a figure put in for the art galleries and museums, but not for swimming pools. And I would have thought there could be a target figure in there. I'm not quite sure why there can't be a target in there. In the same way, you know, it's possible to count attendances, and if they're going to just hold this for 2 quarters, why is there perhaps I'm misunderstanding, but why is there a figure in for museums and art galleries?
So my understanding, yeah.
Sorry, Chair. Is it helpful for me to come in and address that issue, because it was my team that put this plan together? If that's any help to you.
Tim, thank you. That would be very helpful.
No problem, and good afternoon, Ms. Audrey. So my name is Tim Boris. I'm Director of Policy, Strategy and Partnerships at the Council. I've had this question from you for Cabinet next week, and we are endeavouring just to get a bit more detail to address that part of your query. Our suspicion from the team that set or worked with our services to set the targets is it's because council museums are run in-house, whereas the leisure facilities are via a provider contract. So we suspect it's to do with the management in those areas, their liaison with the external provider, having confidence to set targets. We are just following up with officers in the council in the hope we can provide you a bit more information when this question comes to Cabinet next week. But I suspect that will be the answer. And as you'll see in the answer on the screen, that we are planning to address that for Q3 and establish a target now that we have a little bit more evidence and information in the leisure provider sector.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. So, Suzanne, your second question And I think Tim probably won't jump in quite so quickly to answer your supplementary on this one, but do you have a supplementary on your second question, which the screen's just going to bring up now?
Yeah, so sorry, I hadn't read the answer, so I could just see, if the screen could just show me the answer. Sorry, I've been working this morning, so it's above that, or shall I look at it find it on my own?
The answer's on the screen now, which hopefully you can see.
Oh, okay. So is there any? There must be somebody there with you that can just tell me. It just seems like we're repeatedly ruling out a CAS C. Is that the case, that we're never going to have a CAS C? That was my question.
My take on reading the papers is that we're not ruling out anything, but what they're trying to do is look at alternatives if they can persuade JACU that the alternatives will deliver the required outcomes.
Yeah. Okay, it's just that sorry, I know I'm sort of butting in, but on the actual Clean Air website, it implies that we'll only go for, that the council will only apply for a small CAS D. I thought the wording was confusing. I mean, I'm not against clean air remotely, but I just wondered whether the website itself on the clean air that the public look at is quite portraying the same picture as the documents for the meeting.
Okay, Chair, if it's helpful, I'll do my best. This isn't my area.
Okay, Tim. Yeah, thank you.
Certainly happy to pick up that point with colleagues and just review the website for consistency against this. My understanding in terms of the consultation options are because of the legal requirement to reach compliance in as short a time as possible. There are some options, including the one you're referring to, which earlier modelling ruled out and said would not be as viable as some other schemes. So it is true that some of the other options, I think around the medium CAS-D, were discarded at an earlier stage because other formats strongly suggested they get there quicker. So that's been the basis of the shortlisting of options for consultation. So I think that's at the heart of it, but I'm very happy to query that further with strategic transport and come back.
Great, thank you. That's lovely. Thank you very much.
Okay, as ever, thank you, Suzanne. So then we have 3 statements, 2 of which are from David Redgewell, who I believe is with us. I'm just looking. Oh, yes. Are you there, David? Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so if you would like to take us through your 2 statements, David, that would be great.
Thank
Ideally,
you.
if you contain it within 3 minutes, that would be even better.
Yep. I think the issue is around the clean air zone, first of all, is whether or not we can reach compliance with the level of proposals. Whilst I welcome Union Street, Bristol Bridge, Rupert Street, Lewismead, need to reduce the private car and go over to as much public transport. There are some questions around delivery of public transport at the moment with reduced levels of social distancing, means 30 on a double decker, 18 on a single deck and 60 on a train. And the fact we're not allowed the moment to promote public transport by Public Health England, there's some real difficulties around marketing issues. And so it's whether we get to reach the necessary clean air proposals, being able to put in place all the issues that the Mayor and the Metro Mayor have proposed, which we fully support. Cumberland Road's going to be an issue because we do need to make sure we can access the harbour side and the businesses. And that's very, very important. That's looked at. And I think there needs to be integration between the showcase bus route in Cribbs Causeway and the south of the city centre towards Stockwood with the proposals for the clean air zone. They need to congeal together. At the moment, we think they're separate and they need to go together. 2 of the congestion points we picked up as a result of this recently have been Lewis and Rupert Street, where buses or our cars arriving back to Anchor Road, and that does need addressing by the temporary bus, about that. Of the Extinction Rebellion proposals, which are supposed to, in theory, support this, but I have my doubts. I think the idea of we're inviting lots of young people to come to Bristol City Harbour for the weekends from Swindon and Birmingham and the surrounding West Country is somewhat irresponsible in view of the views from Public Health England and the COVID-19. I would like to know what the Avon Somerset and the British Transport Police and the two mayors are going to do about this. I don't believe this will be a controlled event. I'm very concerned about the level of public transport over the weekend and be able to run, and also the need to maintain the network. But we're supposed to have no large social gatherings. That's the law of the land at the moment, £10,000 fine from the government, which I support. So I do have to ask why we've allowed that to happen, Chair, and perhaps that could be taken. I know that can't go to Cabinet, but it needs to be raised with the Chief Executive, I think, and Asher Craig, who trying to look at this issue to see why this event is actually trying. But those are my points. I think there's a lot more work to do on the clean air zone, but I think we need to get on with it and implement it in the city centre, really. But integrate it with making sure there's adequate public transport. Remind at the moment, the final, I suppose, on public transport, the Metro is still only running 85% of services. Still don't have buses in the evenings to Thornbury and C8 on the Fishponds Road, Gloucester Road. And Sunday service aren't there, and there's no Bristol Bath service for getting alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And the last statement is from Christina Biggs. Christina, can you oh yes, you unmuted yourself. Welcome, Christina. If you'd like to take us through your statement, which should be coming up on screen now.
My video has been stopped by the host. Could the host? Oh, great. Okay. Yeah. So today I'm representing the Bristol Clean Air Alliance. I think just to assure you of our support. We know this is a difficult issue with the clean air zone. We are concerned about the impact on small businesses. So we're very supportive of the measures you put in the city centre, like closing Baldwin Street to buses, Park Street. We very much commend these initiatives, and would very much welcome a solution that avoids charging commercial vehicles. As you know, some of us are quite in favour of the small area diesel ban, so we understand that's not on the table, but it would be really great if Bristol could come up with a solution that doesn't penalise small businesses. So yeah, we just want to assure you that we understand it's a complicated issue. Whatever works well, and I think it's worth taking time to get it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. So members, I'm suggesting that we note those statements and that we ask Lucy or Joe, if they would, to formally pass on David Redwell's second statement to Mike Jackson, and the other two statements to Stephen Peacock and Adam Crowther, and asking for them to respond. Are members happy with that? Yeah. Okay. So the next item on the agenda is item 7, which is the Scrutiny work programme. And I'm going to hand over to Lucy to just speak briefly on this one. Lucy.
Yes, members. So before you is the Scrutiny work programme, which, as you know, you've all been working on for some weeks now in conjunction with your commission member colleagues. So just for the purposes of the people viewing the webcast, please note there was an informal OSM meeting just recently where the topics were taken through in detail and, you know, discussed and scoped, etc. So really all that's being asked of you today, OSM members, is that you just formally approve the work programme that's before you if you're happy with it.
Thank you. Does anybody have any comment to make before we formally approve that work programme? Anthony, you're muted at the moment.
Just doing that. Okay. Following the meeting we had with the executive members last week, we've had a Leeds meeting today, and we have revised the scope, maybe slightly the timetable as well, of the work programme. The intentions are still the same for the Community Scrutiny Commission, but we have taken on board what's been said, and I think all members were broadly in agreement with the more focused approach that we're going to have to this particular piece of work. That's all I have to say. Excellent.
That's really positive. Steve.
In the resources scrutiny list, you'll see that the IT transformation programme has got to be confirmed. There's a bit of a debate whether that should go to audit or come to resources. I've looked again at the terms of reference of resources, and it seems to me that it does come within the ambit of resources, although I would very much like audit to be involved. I think they've got a slightly different role. So I'm just really telling you, Jeff, that there is a discussion about that which hasn't yet quite been resolved. I don't know if you've got an opinion or if others have got an opinion on that point.
But my view is I understand the officer position that they're very happy this is on an agenda, but they prefer it was only on one agenda. So my preference is that we either have a joint audit committee meeting or a joint resources meeting with the other body, and that the item is raised in that one place, but with the other party involved. That will be my preference, so that we are only we're covering the topic once with all those who are interested. So yeah. I hope we can broker some sort of arrangement that makes that work between you and Mark Brain and the respective committees.
Yeah, I mean, we've dealt with the detail of this now for 18 months, I think it's been going. So we're quite well into the detail. I'd be very happy for Mark and any other members of audit to be invited to the resource commission that deals with this issue. Would that satisfy you, Jeff?
It's actually what satisfies you and Mark. So my suggestion is that we leave the wording as it is at the moment, and that you and Mark get together. I'm happy to join that meeting, and we just talk through and work out what and how we resolve it. But I think that's better than making a unilateral decision, because it's got to be you and he agreeing what's going to work.
Okay, so I'll organise, or if I can ask Lucy to note that we're to organise a meeting between me and Mark to discuss the issue, and we'll invite you, Jeff, as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good.
Okay.
Good.
Thanks.
Okay. In that case, can I just ask members if they approve the work programme to just raise a hand, just so that we can see that everyone's in favour? Yep. Okay. Thank you. And thank you for that. So what I also propose is that we will table a brief paper to go to Cabinet next week, which will formally record the work programme in the Cabinet papers, so that we've got that covered. So thank you for that. So item 8 is pages 18 to 35 of your papers, Q1 performance, and welcome Guy Collins to his first Osm meeting. And Guy, we're all still getting used to this slightly strange remote meeting. And I don't think any of us have worked out whether it's easier or harder. Certainly when you're presenting the first time, it's slightly more difficult when you can't actually see us in person. But welcome, and over to you for a brief introduction, and then any questions.
Yes, hello, thank you, Councillor, and hello everybody else. I think I've met a few already, but to those of you that I haven't, a big hello. It's my 5th week in the council and my first OSM, so I'm going to make the best I can of the technology and hope that my screen will be allowed to share. Okay, has everyone got sight of the overview and Scrutiny Management Board Q1 performance report? I'm hoping so.
Yep.
Okay, brilliant. Right. So I'm here to really present the report. I won't take up too much of your time. I will, during the course of it, touch on a few areas of relevance. But of course, if anybody has any questions, then please feel free to ask. And if I'm unable to answer and Tim is unable to answer, then we'll certainly seek a response for you in good time. The formality of it on page 18 of the pack is that OSM note the progress made by all directorates against their key performance indicators for Q1 of 2021, and scrutiny members and directors discuss measures to address any performance issues that they may have. The headlines generally are that we are where we would expect to be in Q1, but as it's Q1, a number of indicators aren't reported because, for example, they're annual indicators and some have been suspended due to COVID-19, the pandemic. Of the measures that are reported this quarter, 48.5% of the target, the established targets, are on or above that target, and 55% of the cumulative measures are performing better than at the same point last year. I'm just going to move the report on now to the next page, page 19, just to highlight a couple of issues here. Firstly, is that this is the first year that we've taken a slightly different approach to differentiating between the indicators that are wholly owned by the council and also those that are owned or shared with partners. They're listed accordingly on the pack as BCC or citywide, and they're hopefully clear to see for members there. And also, of course, I have to mention the impact of COVID. Many indicators have been significantly affected and some suspended, and you can see there on the screen that some are marked exempt for performance status due to the severe impact, and some services have in fact been closed. I'm just going to move down to skip through here. The highlights for each of the corporate strategy themes are set out across this next section, and there's a further explanation and a narrative around each of the indicators contained on pages 24 to 30 of your pack. I'm going to head down now to what we call the pentagram. I think you're familiar with this graphic, and I should try and make it smaller so that everybody can see it. I had prepared a number of points here, but what I think I'll do for the interest of saving time is I'll take questions or observations or comments on anything that's in here or in the indicators below it and see if I can respond accordingly. Are there any questions, observations on what's on? Yeah.
Hi. Can I just ask, it says that you've improved invoice payments in the preamble, and it says that they're now at sort of 2015 levels. I couldn't actually find the line on the performance report to actually give me the percentage increase. I was wondering if you could just quickly find that for me or update me on how that is.
Rather than scroll through and probably send everybody blind and whizzy, are you okay if I do that and come back to you?
Yes.
Is that all right? It
Yeah.
says invoice payments of...
It just says we're above target,
yeah.
And I just wondered whether that was significantly above target or a little bit.
Councillor Hiscott, sorry to jump in, it's Tim here. I've done some scrolling offline. The target for the year is 85% and the Q1 progress is at 86%. So the answer a little bit above target.
Marvellous.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you very much. And do we know what the backlog still is? Because I've been following this.
I'm afraid that's something we need to take offline. Unfortunately, we haven't got the narrative section on that one this quarter, so we'll follow up with finance colleagues and let you know.
Fine. Thank you.
Awesome.
So a general question. Oh, Brenda, I'll come to you and then I'll come over mine. Brenda.
Just unmuting myself. The one of the ones I'm just trying to find, it's BCP 8307 about increasing the number of disabled people unable to live at home. That's going down, and this is a real problem because we need to get people out of hospital and preferably not into nursing homes. But if we've got backlogs of delays, which I can only assume might be due to COVID, how long is it likely to be before we can catch up on those? I've had experience recently of a resident in my own ward that was waiting to be discharged from re-ablement, and eventually her family had to take on doing everything themselves so that she could actually come home.
Absolutely. I'm just trying to find the narrative around it here. It appears at the bottom of the screen here. I'm just highlighting there. It's a relatively light narrative. I agree absolutely the impact of that is significant. I'm not sure whether any colleagues from adult social care are here, but if not, I will. I'll take that offline and get a response for you.
I believe it's actually comes under housing rather than adult social care.
Okay.
Is that the point you were going to make, Helen?
It is, yes. The accessible home service, although obviously we work very closely with them, but it does come under housing and landlord services. So.
Okay, yeah, my mistake. I'll follow it up for you happily.
Thank you.
Okay, Guy, my question, it might be more for Tim, I don't know, was about the targets. When were the targets fixed and set? And I was looking specifically at the council tax and non-domestic rate collections, where the targets were clearly reduced because of COVID. So I'm just wondering when those were set, who they were set by, who determined what they were reduced to because of COVID, and how we can then monitor where we are against them when we're not looking at a target that was a full year's normal performance.
Okay, I may have to bow to Tim for that one, as I wasn't here.
Going to bow to you, Guy. I will confirm that offline, Councillor Goll. The short answer is that the target setting review was undertaken with directors and heads of service as part of the review of the business plan. I'll be completely honest and say I think the last 6 months or so have all blurred into one for me. So from memory, I think we started that process around June, July sort of time. So it was far enough into the impact of the pandemic that I think we'd started to get a handle on what some of the impacts might be, albeit probably still with a level of uncertainty, which indeed continues to this day. So the answer is it will have been set and cleared by the director, and it will have been around the June or July time.
So if I can just follow up by saying, just in the context of those two figures, I find this very confusing because I'm not given the full year target, but I'm given an adjusted target for the year with a quarterly achievement with nothing to measure the quarterly achievement against what would normally be expected. So I'm just flagging up that it's not as helpful in that context as I would expect a performance report like this to be. So just to
I think that's a very good challenge, Chair.
Yeah. Meaningful information.
Yeah, I think that's a really good challenge. I think what we've done is updated the annual targets and put those in, but we absolutely will have the targets as would have been set in February if it were a normal year. So I think that's what you're referring to, and we can certainly include that as a column in future.
But I suppose really just making the point that I would normally divide the total for the year or the target for the year by 4 and see how we're doing per quarter. But I know that doesn't work, but I don't know what does. So it's just a question of how to make that more meaningful. Thank you, Tim. Paula.
Hello, everybody. I just want to ask a couple of questions. It's in the well-being. The first one is BCP 433. And it's about carbon reduction. So the statistics look good. I'm a bit unsure about the period that it covers because there's a final sentence which says this measure is reported at around 18 months after the end of the calendar year. So I suppose really the question is, does the reduction include the lockdown period, or is it something that was done 18 months ago and you're only reporting on it, you're only gathering the information on it now?
Reading that, the former. But again, and apologies for not knowing the intricacies of some of these indicators. I'll find out for you and get a definitive answer.
So you think it is very recent?
No, sorry,
no.
Councillor O'Rourke, sorry, it has got the lag on it. So
okay,
because of the way it's calculated, it runs 18 months after the end of the year. Yeah, so it'll be
that's really good. So that's a really good picture then, isn't it? Because it's going in the right direction and it seems to be going quite quickly. So that's a good thing. But then the one underneath it, I just want to flag up that I know we're going to be spending quite a bit of time talking about clean air. And while I completely understand the strategy going forward, I think we do need to be able to link back to see that the particulate damage and the links to deaths as a result of that has increased and is increasing. So I think that that's something that we should bear in mind when we're talking about the clean air strategy.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. That's noted, thank you. Yeah, and as you'll see, that the data for that indicator comes from Public Health England, as was. So we will need to follow up on the how and where of retrieving that in the future.
Okay, very changing. Thank you.
Right. Any other members want to ask?
Yes,
questions?
Yes, please, Jeff.
Oh, yeah, Stephen, yeah.
Hi, Guy. We had a very helpful meeting. Thank you. I suppose I'm a bit confused, really. The overall figure, the sort of headline figure, is that less than half of targets are, or just under half targets are on or above the targets, and I'm a bit confused whether that is because the targets themselves are unrealistic, or because of COVID, or possibly because of performance. And it could be different answers to those with each of the indicators. But I find it hard to come to some sort of overall conclusion about how we're doing, what these indicators are telling us. Do you have any comment on that, Guy?
I'd direct really to the individual indicators themselves, because I think the narrative around each is slightly different. Some will no doubt have been impacted significantly due to COVID and the impact that that's had. Some may well be down to performance. Given what Tim had mentioned earlier and my knowledge of the target setting process, it is I gather, robust and goes through a range of scrutiny and processes that agree the targets to be challenging. So if there are lags around that in terms of achieving them, then the explanation, if it's not COVID, will be around potential performance issues that should be covered in the narrative from each of the individual indicators.
But did I hear you or one of you mention that a number of the targets have been changed because of COVID, sort of halfway through the process? So should that not have taken account of a lot of the COVID affected targets? Perhaps I misunderstood that.
Well, I think some has. I mean, some, for example, services have been closed, that births, deaths and marriages, the registrations, I think, were significantly less. And some have been skewed by virtue of COVID. For example, the number of people in temporary accommodations gone high. So yeah, I think it is down to that.
Yeah, just to clarify there, Councillor Clark, it's Tim here, and it is the case that they have been reviewed. So insofar as possible, the impact of COVID should be taken into account, though, of course, as I alluded to, the level of changeability and uncertainty did mean that was a best educated guess process. And just if you invite reflections on the overall performance, what I would say to you is that based on our annual outturn over the last couple of years, around half on target and half below is about where the council's been. And I think, as you suggested, is a rich mix of all of the reasons you've suggested. We have quite a long and robust target setting and performance indicator setting process each year, of which scrutiny is a part. In some areas, there may be legitimate performance issues which need to be addressed. But it's a rich mix. There are others where we know there's, for instance, a statutory target in some areas which we fully expect we couldn't meet for perfectly legitimate reasons, but because of it being statutory, for example, we set ourselves a target knowing we may not get there. In other areas, we may set stretch targets and just not quite achieve as much as we want to. So it's always that balance between stretching ourselves and trying to be realistic about that, and not resting on our laurels. And the work that Guy and his team are doing with me this year is really to try and bring together both this but other indicators of organisational performance, such as financial risk and audit information, and look at this in the round so that in future years we can try and give you our best attempt at a balanced view of what it really means, because I appreciate it is quite an art to interpret at the moment.
If I can just come out once more, Jeff. Thank you. So I suppose my own preference from my business background really would be that while I understand stretch targets and challenging targets, I'm not very happy with targets that can obviously never be met. So I'd much sooner a pragmatic target that if we do really well, we beat. But if, in most circumstances, we think that's a realistic target. So I suppose I don't know what the philosophy behind the target organisation is, but perhaps that's a discussion for another day, Tim.
Yeah, thank you. Very happy to pick that up in the performance framework process for next year, but I'll make a note of that point. Thank you.
Thanks.
If I just add on from that, Steve, and Tim, it does seem to me that we're back to that question of where scrutiny involvement can be in the target setting, and I don't think scrutiny should be setting the targets, far from it, because it's got to be an executive decision. But I would have thought that there could be scope for scrutiny involvement and looking at those targets and ensuring that there is a robustness there before we actually see the performance report that shows how we're doing. Because it's very difficult to see when you're coming up to halfway through the year how those performance targets were chosen at the time, given how much has changed since. So can we perhaps bear that in mind as an area where there could be some engagement at an appropriate stage earlier than would normally be the case with looking at the first quarter's performance?
Yes, Chair, very happy to do that. It's a fair challenge. I think this year, without meaning to lean on the COVID excuse too much, I think officers have just done their best in the circumstances they were in, but it's a perfectly reasonable challenge and we can certainly pick that up within next year's process. Yeah,
and Tim, from my point of view, not really meant as a challenge, because I think we all accept these are absolutely unique times, but targets are, if they're owned by people and defended, actually challenge from members can be a constructive part of that process in normal circumstances. So it's how we can make it work better and actually make it a more joined up story, I think. So
yeah, absolutely, and we warmly welcome that.
Thank you. Anthony's caught my eye, and I don't think there's anybody else, so I'll go to Anthony and then we'll conclude this item. Anthony.
I'm struggling looking through here. You won't know, Guy, but I'm sure our paths will cross. I certainly had a lot of conversations with Mark Wakefield about how these things are constructed. Looking at all these things, I think some are very clearly going to be influenced by COVID. I think some are secondary because of redeployment and various other aspects of the way that we've been able to cope with certain things, and some are tertiary. I think it's going to be a very long time before we can actually look back and see in the future comparable figures, because this year is not going to be for 6 or 8 or 12 months. It's going to roll on and have impacts for a very long time ahead. So I think this might be a very good time to review what we're doing about performance generally. I don't agree with you, Jeff, about setting targets. I think perhaps the way we go about identifying things that we want to learn about is certainly left to officers, I think, and I think that's their role. But I do think that members should be involved in trying to pitch what sort of areas are interesting, and very often the question you ask doesn't answer the question you're looking for. You're looking for the answer to. You'll be asking a very different question, particularly in terms of social aspects of the way people do things than the measure you're trying to achieve. So I think it's for the officers to determine the questions. I do think members have a role in trying to better understand and promote various areas which we feel that should be better explored. And I think that's something that shouldn't be left to individual scrutiny commissions. I think that should sit squarely within OSM because it concerns all of us. So I would like that to be a piece of work that we consider for the future, for the near future, I suspect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. I think that concludes that item on the agenda. So, Guy, thank you. Thank you for your time. I hope that wasn't too arduous for you as a first presentation.
Thank you. Apologies for the there's a whole plethora of targets in there, and Tim, as he's mentioned, and I are looking in the round at how performance is presented to members and the public, and there are some changes that we will make, and certainly the points that have been made today will be taken on board and considered in the round.
Wonderful. Thank you, Guy. Much appreciated.
Thank you, everybody.
So we move on, and following our practice of making sure when we get Tim to a meeting, we use him on a number of items. So item 9 is the corporate business plan, COVID-19 recovery edition. Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to serve. So bringing you the updated business plan for this year, as set out in the report. The plan really this year has gone from being a noun in normal years to more of a verb. Planning seems to be an ongoing process now, with a level of uncertainty that obviously is new to a lot of officers in the council. The reason we've undertaken the approach we have is really as we move out of the major incident phase of the first wave of COVID response and towards a more of a balance in undertaking recovery work while still responding to the pandemic, is we wanted to bring the longer term recovery and medium term actions back into what we might call a business as usual process. Accepting points have already been made here today that this is for the long haul. So we wanted to bring this level of strategic planning into the normal recognisable format for the council, and we chose to do that by updating the council's annual business plan. You'll recall OSM and others were involved in putting this together as part of the annual planning process earlier in the calendar year. It was completed and signed off in time for publication, but for obvious reasons was not published on April 1st as planned. Instead, we undertook a rapid review of the plan as soon as capacity allowed in the response phase of COVID. And I've been working with senior officers, directors, cabinet members and the mayor over the past couple of months to revisit every action that was previously listed in the business plan for 2020 and 21, and really recast the business plan from the perspective of what's now possible and what the current and best, not best guess, but best known priorities need to be for the remainder of this financial year. So the product of that is the plan that's in front of you today. The substantive change, which will not have escaped you, is the introduction of a recovery and renewal chapter to the plan. It's presented in a familiar format, in the format we normally present each of the council's corporate themes, and covers at a very high level the approach to recovery and renewal, some of the key opportunities and actions and aims for that work. And perhaps unusually and not normally in the business plan, a little bit of a narrative section explaining some more of the strategic background, some of the underlying principles, and refers and alludes to some of the way the council has structured itself to manage recovery work. But then a bit more familiarly on page 52 of your packs onwards, you'll see under each of the recovery cells, which are aligned to the council's executive director meetings, its departments. So overall, you'll see against each thematic cell there a list of what they consider to be the top high level priority work that needs to be done in the remainder of the financial year to address recovery, noting that this captures a point in time, that this is still an ongoing process, and that there is a great amount of uncertainty and change still ahead. So we have put suitable caveats in this plan that do say that there is it's subject to change, that it is accurate as we know it today. But that obviously we will need to continue to be very flexible and agile as an organisation and adapt some of these actions or priorities as needs require over the year. Also included in your packs today is a change log for the plans at Appendix 3. Which may be some of the easiest reference points for those of you who are familiar with the planning process earlier in the year in just determining what has changed in the plan since we originally approved it. With apologies, there is an inaccuracy in this on the total number of actions and the balance of actions. That's just a version control error. So you'll see actually overall the correct number of actions for the council are in the plan itself on page 44 of your packs. So 160 actions, discrete actions are now listed in the business plan, compared, I believe, with 154 in the original planned business plan for this year. So overall, a similar level of priority actions. The balance between ongoing and new has shifted, so a lot more newer actions, and we've had to let go of some of the priorities we thought we might have this year. But all of those are detailed in the Appendix 3 change log, where you can see which of the previous actions have changed and which have been deleted as well. So that's a brief introduction to the structure and approach to the business plan this year, but very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Tim. Who'd like to go first? Celia.
You may not be able to answer this, Tim, but firstly, I'd like to thank very much the council staff who worked absolutely flexibly and agile over the last few months. And I know many people have done completely new, different things that they, haven't experienced before, but have picked it up and worked with it. So I'd like you to thank all the staff. But I'm just wondering how many or which services are now almost back to normal practice, or which ones are still working much more flexibly. I think it's, we've been, it's been difficult for us to know exactly who is functioning as norm.
Sure, thank you, and thank you for the feedback on staff. And we're actually just in internal communications running a sort of thank you campaign for staff at the moment. Yeah. So I'll make sure that's played into that, and I'm sure it's appreciated by all. In terms of the substantive question on who's returned to normal, I'm afraid it's not one I'd have off the top of my head. My general reflection is I'm not sure anybody has. So in my general day-to-day dealings, the aim has been to bring some of the recovery and response work into as normal as possible. So I think more of us are working in a way we would recognise as normal in terms of how teams are structured and not being redeployed into other areas and things that are completely new to us. But for example, if I took my own division, we're doing our day job, but our day job is perhaps 50-60% about COVID and recovery and response in some way or shape or form, accepting that that's now one of the priorities for the business. But I'll see if we've got anything more scientific than that, which can shed some more light on anything around redeployment in particular.
Thank you. I think it's just helpful to know that we're still, by a long way, not sort of back to wherever, if ever that ever comes back.
Claire, were you trying to catch my eye just now, Claire? No. Paula.
Hi. As usual, I always think these are really great fun to read. I think it always gives you that sense of things being in control and having a vision and a dynamic forward thrust. So I think that's really good. And I also always think that the time spent working on these, is very worthwhile. Just two things I wanted to say at this point. One, and they're both in economy and business on page 56 of the document. And the thing is about the reviewing the capital programme around Temple Quarter. I think, that's soothing to hear, because obviously I think that whole area does need to be revisited. And I just think that from an Muslim point of view, it's something that maybe we would want to get a bit more detail on as time moves on. So that's just something really for you, Jeff, or unless Tim wants to say something about how we might be able to get some more information about it, or what the review of it would look like. So that's one question. And then the other question is, in the success criteria, I was wondering if you would consider putting in a correct criteria around something around retraining or reskilling, because I think we're all, and you mentioned it yourself, you know, the 8,000 jobs that we're likely to use, and they are going to be in the retail and hospitality sector. And I think it would be really reassuring to think that we were being proactive about offering some retraining, reskilling programs on a citywide basis for those who are particularly going to be younger people, because I think there will be a huge amount of loss from hospitality and retail. And I think that would be a good success criteria, because it would, you know, if you had it as a success criteria, it would then sort of retrospectively push everybody in that direction.
Yeah, thank you. On Temple Quarter, probably more detail than I have to hand, but what I would say is we've done some work recently, particularly in government relations, around some of the key strategic asks on Temple Quarter and the current status of funding. That's been actually pulled together into a brochure, so I'm more than happy to make sure a copy of that gets to members, and that might help you in considering if and where you wish to direct your attentions. And I'll let Stephen Peacock, as Executive Director, know about that. In terms of the reskilling, I think absolutely it's an area that will be a priority and we'll need to explore, and certainly it's come out in some of the One City economic statement of intent, sort of in the direction there. Obviously, there is a mix now between ourselves and the combined authority and other partners around responsibility. So it's actually an area, employment skills in general, where some of the specificity of actions has been removed from the business plan, and a more generic, we need to revisit and recast this, reprioritise it, has been put in at the front end of the plan. So that is a developing picture. It's absolutely something that we'd want to track, because that will be a key measure of success in future.
Okay, thank you, Tim.
Brenda? And then Claire.
Thank you, Chair. I was actually very pleased to see lots of mentions about educational skills in there, so in the documents, that was really good. But on page 91, under tackling food and food poverty, I see there's something in there that says warmer homes and people living in fuel poverty, and that's down to educational skills, which I thought was a bit confusing. So I wondered if there was a reason why that would come under education.
So I'm just trying to find the exact reference.
Yeah, it's page 52 of the document, 91 of our ModGov one.
Yeah. The totally honest answer to that is I think you found the one remaining typo in the document. We were fairly ruthless on this, but working between Word versions and a designed version always does this to us. So I fully suspect that's an error, and we can make sure that's corrected before it's published on the website.
I was a bit confused by it, and I did read it several times and think, I don't understand that one. So.
I think we all go until we've all gone blind to it, so that's helpful to some fresh eyes. Thank you.
It's my proofreading back again then. Thank you.
Claire.
Yeah, hi, Tim. Just following on from what Paula was saying about reskilling. I'm mindful that in the document we have a lot of unspent apprenticeship levy, and whether we're going to be having a real focus on spending that, because there are going to be a lot of especially young people who have lost their jobs in hospitality and various sectors, and who will be looking for jobs. And it seems a real shame if we don't spend that apprenticeship levy and really get, perhaps some people into the council on that, which is actually a sort of win-win, because you could be training people up, getting people out of sectors that aren't going to be as employment heavy. And I wondered, what the target was for using that apprenticeship levy in the autumn, or what the focus was. There's a little bit in there about it, but didn't know whether you could expand.
Thank you, Councillor Hiscott. Yeah, on some of the detail, I'll need to come back to you offline around any targets for that. What I would just reflect on in terms of the spend of it, it's absolutely something that's come to attention quite a few times. We're currently working on an update of the Council's organisational improvement plan to become a workforce strategy. And as part of the annual service and business planning process within the Council this year, will actually for the first time be bringing proactive workforce planning into that process for managers. So that will be all managers at what we call the third tier, so a head of service level within the council will be tasked with doing proactive workforce planning, including issues such as how they make best use of the apprenticeship levy and bring in new pipelines of talent to the council. So that will be one area which we will go at that from. Another, it's fair to say, is there's a lot of restrictions in how we use the apprenticeship levy as it stands. I don't have all the detail to hand, but I do know it's forming part of some of our ask to government at the moment around funding is the flexibility to still use it around employment, education and skills, but perhaps with some of the particular restrictions that are placed on it eased, certainly in the short term, to make it easier for the council to spend and get out the door and doing good.
Great, thanks. That's good to hear, Tim. Thanks.
Okay, anybody else? Tim, one general comment from me is first of all, I mean, this is an impressive document and an enormous amount of work has gone into it. What I found looking at it now when I haven't seen it for some time is it's also a very long document, and so it's really only a question of presentational. Is that I can see there is a need for this detail in a working document that is fundamental to all that the authority does, but I think in terms of conveying the message, there needs to be something that is a very much an executive summary that can extract from it. I don't know, that's just a feeling that it's not doing the council as much justice as it could in a short, sharp summary with the detail underlying it. So that's a personal view, but just how it hit me on this occasion.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's a conversation I recognise amongst officers, and indeed linked to the need as an organisation to be very clear and prioritised. So it's very much on our minds, but one I'll try to wrangle with as we move into next year's plan. Thank you.
But if you could also convey, because I'm sure members would agree, there's a phenomenal amount of work gone into this. So if you could convey to your team and everybody who's played a part in putting it together what an extraordinary piece of work it is, I think we'd appreciate that.
Absolutely will. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Now, I think, therefore, we can now move on to item 10, which is the Clean Air Plan update. Welcome, Adam. And Mike has appeared as if by magic at that very moment as well. So welcome, Mike. Adam, are you going to introduce? Can't hear you at the moment. You're muted at the moment.
Is that working now?
That's it.
Yeah,
that's it.
I have this problem. So yeah, what I was going to do was quickly run through the paper, highlighting the salient points, and then take questions, and I can refer to various other documents and maps and such like to maybe explain some of the detail at that point when people have the questions that they want to ask of us. So I'm just going to quickly run. Just
before you start, can I just make sure members are all aware that the paper is in the cabinet papers, and that's where you should be looking for this item. Yep, everybody's aware. So yeah, Adam, over to you.
Okay, so starting from the top. We've been issued a new direction by government in relation to clean air zone, which was issued on the 20th of August, and that supersedes the previous direction that we had on the 13th of March 2020. So the cabinet paper is largely about explaining what that direction requires and also providing an update on what we've been doing since the last update that we provided. Due to COVID, the government issued some additional advice in April time when they basically said they didn't want any clean air zones implemented before January 2021. So I think this was a reflection on the potential impact of those zones and the difficulty of delivering them during COVID with lockdown and everything else happening. A number of cities then altered their plans. So Leeds, Birmingham and Bath were delayed until January 2021. Oxford have postponed theirs until the summer of 2021, and Manchester have halted their consultation on their clean air zone. From our perspective, we were, I suppose, just approaching the point where we were going to start doing a lot of engagement with businesses, which wasn't possible because of the lockdown. So it did require a delay to the work that we were doing. We were still able to progress some of the more technical bits, but it meant we certainly couldn't progress some of that engagement that was really a necessity for ensuring that the plan was a success. So the new direction that was issued on 20th of August to ourselves has directed a couple of things. So the key thing it's directing is that we are to deliver a medium charging clean air zone class C with a small charging clean air zone class D and additional measures subject to provision of further evidence. So the medium charging clean air zone class C, that's what we're working on previously. That's what we discussed last time. It's the bigger zone charging commercial vehicles only. The key change here is that the central smaller zone would now be a charging class D zone rather than a diesel ban. So the government does not want us to proceed with a diesel ban anymore. Instead, we're going to look at a charging class D zone in the central area, and that is for private cars. So the medium zone covers the commercial vehicles and the smaller zone covers private vehicles in the centre. That is caveated to some degree by the need to provide additional information and modelling by the 4th of December 2020, which we'll come to in a minute. And then finally, well, sorry, not quite finally, but the full business case needs to be submitted now by the 26th of February. So that was due to be submitted in September. It's now due to be submitted by 26th of February next year. And then the latest date on which we can implement the scheme will be by 29th of October 2021. And I think it's important to note what actually implementing a scheme means. So by that, they mean implementing the charging zones. I think we would probably argue we've already partly implemented schemes because of what we've been doing in the city centre in terms of reducing traffic volumes, which again, we'll cover just in a minute. So what we've been doing as part of the COVID response, and that was at the direction of government, but we also recognise as an opportunity to address some of our air quality issues, was trying to remove some of that through traffic from the centre of town and provide more sustainable options to people. I suppose you'd probably say that was always what we would prefer to do in terms of dealing with air quality, is to provide a longer term sustainable solution rather than a charging zone which is more effective at getting people to change their vehicles rather than change their mode, if you like, and change their way of getting around. So you'll know about the Bristol Bridge closure and Baldwin Street and various other cycle routes that we've put in. I'll cover those in a bit more detail further down. But I think it's important to note at this point that those measures coming in now have led to those kind of immediate air quality improvements and trying to capture some of the improvement in air quality that we've had due to the reduced amount of movement that has been going on due to the COVID lockdown, which is still in place to some extent, although traffic levels are starting to increase. Now, that's made some fairly significant changes to our road network, so we need to do more modelling to reflect what those changes make to traffic volumes and then the air quality impacts. So we've agreed a process of modelling with JACU as to how we will test what the likely impacts of these changes are, and therefore what those impacts might be on any further charging zones that might be required if necessary. So to summarise what I guess our new approach is, we're going to be putting in a lot more air quality monitors. I just need to be very clear, this is mainly the diffusion tubes. So I'll be putting in one constant air quality monitor in the Marlborough Street area. The rest are the diffusion tubes, which are collected on a monthly basis. And the reason for doing that is that so we get a better picture of what air quality is looking like across the city. Because the COVID, you know, we've made some changes, but COVID has made changes of its own, and people have made changes of their own in terms of how they're conducting their business. People are getting more deliveries, people are working from home, etc. That may all change back after COVID to how it was. It's quite likely that it won't change back all the way to how it was. So we want to be basing our new approach more on an understanding of what's actually happening in the city. So therefore, better understanding of the pollution levels on a more up-to-date basis. And we'll also be utilising ANPR data to monitor that as well. ANPR data being the traffic data that tells us the traffic volumes. So in addition to that, we're implementing our fast track measures, which I will go through in a bit more detail shortly, and then other sustainable transport projects. So as well as the fast track measures that you'll already have seen, we have a number of longer term projects that are in train, things like the Miller Road scheme, the A37, A4018 scheme, which has just gone out to consultation, various other projects along those lines that are aiming to improve access to sustainable transport modes. The three-stage modelling process. So what we've agreed with JACU is that we will do a very high-level model of the changes that we've already made. So Bristol Bridge, removing a lane on Haymarket and Lewins Mead, taking the lanes out on Upper Magdalen Street. We've done that first stage, which is to give a very high-level indication of what happens to the traffic. Now, it's not a very accurate model, because in that model we haven't allowed the system to redistribute those flows or allow people to change their mode onto other modes. We just wanted to get a very high level indication so we could make any changes if we needed to before moving on to the next stage. So we're now on to the next stage, which is a more detailed and accurate model of what is likely to be the outcome of the changes that we've already made to the city centre. We're liaising with JACU at each point in that process. And after the next stage, when we have the more accurate model in place, we will liaise with them again to agree that they're happy with where we are before doing the full air quality and transport model to get outputs as to what the compliance year will be from the changes that we've already made. As part of that, then that final stage will also have a degree of sensitivity testing. So as an example, I think the JACU kind of asked us some time ago, what happens if many more people come back onto cars rather than onto public transport? What happens if they don't change their vehicles? So we're also making the point of, well, what if a lot of people stay at home and work from home? We need to test what the different potential impacts might do to air quality in the city so that our plan is robust. And that final stage will have that sensitivity testing within it to say what happens if there's 10% less traffic, or what if there's more traffic, or if people don't change their vehicles. That sort of thing will be looked at in that final stage to give us a robust output. So the immediate implementation of those transport improvements are covered in the fast track measures, and development of a charging CAS. So those are the final points of what our overall plan is. So we're still developing the CAS zones. We're still working on the medium CAS C, and also looking at the small CAS D and what we need to implement that. And that is to be delivered if required. So the idea is that the evidence and the changes that we're making give us a kind of baseline, and then we can be saying, as we're developing plans for the clean air zones, if the traffic levels are reaching this sort of level, then we're going to need the CAS D. If they reach this level, we're going to need the CAS C, etc. It's trying very much to give a much more kind of, I suppose, accurate and realistic representation of what is going on and what we need to do, rather than the previous approach of just doing a CAS. And the reason for that really is to try and, as I say, get people into sustainable modes by making those changes to the traffic network rather than change their vehicles, accepting that if we need to implement the CAS zone to get people to change their vehicles as well, then we can do that. So the fast track measures that I mentioned, I'll just quickly run through exactly what those are. So there's Bristol Bridge and Baldwin Street. So that has effectively removed all the through traffic from the centre of town. Now, we still have some compliance issues. The cameras are in now, and we will shortly be sending people letters to say you have been caught going through a bus lane, etc. We won't be fining people to start with, because obviously it is a very, very major change to people's travel patterns. So we're going to give it a good bedding in time to let people get used to it. But that change, I think we can certainly argue as a city, has made a significant improvement to air quality in the whole central part of the city, well in advance of what we would have expected through implementing a clean air zone. You know, Baldwin Street was one of our worst streets. It will now be one of our best streets. So we've made an immediate impact that wouldn't have happened until 2023. We've also taken lanes out on Upper Magdalen Street and Marlborough Street, and there's some additional works to come in the next phase to increase that, and they've been replaced with cycle lanes. I've been cycling around for the last 2 or 3 weeks, monitoring all of what's been happening with the traffic levels. And certainly the worst section of highway that we had, which was the narrow section on Marlborough Street, where the buildings are very close to the road, is now generally 2 lanes of fairly flowing, reasonably light traffic, when it used to be 3 lanes of largely stationary traffic. So we're hopeful that change has made a significant difference to that corridor as well, and that providing the sustainable transport option will encourage more people to shift their mode from car to cycle. We've also put a cycle route in on Lewins Mead and Haymarket. We are reviewing that one. It's causing some delays to buses, so we're looking at how to manage that. We've put some extra signage in this week, which should help, but we'll be constantly monitoring all of these schemes to make sure they're delivering what they need to, and also looking at what happens when schools come back and the traffic volumes start to change again. There are a few other associated cycle schemes as well. They're a bit further out in general, so not as kind of pertinent to this part of the scheme. Cumberland Road has been closed inbound to traffic, so that's been done as part of the Chocolate Path repair works. We were intending to do it as part of the scheme anyway, but that is now in place, so there's no inbound traffic on Cumberland Road, and that's about reducing the volume of traffic that comes into the centre of town. We're also managing the traffic signals to improve the flow of traffic and try and stop the central bit clogging up. So I've been spending a lot of time talking to traffic signals over the last 2 weeks about making sure we've got those operating well through the city. Installing additional air quality monitoring units, as I mentioned, and also starting to engage more with residents and businesses about their role and about changing your modes where possible. And you know, we've done quite a bit in the centre of the city in terms of the emergency changes we've made due to COVID. The next set of changes will be further out to give people quieter, safer routes to cycle into town, but also to remove some of those rat runs in areas that are further out. Again, trying to encourage people to use other modes so that they don't start that journey that goes all the way into the centre of town. They have other ways of getting around, and also other ways of getting around their local areas. We're also working very closely with First to ensure that the buses are protected as far as possible, and they have delivered additional buses on what they're calling the 2A route, so it's additional to the 2, providing additional frequencies through town, which is a real bonus as well. But obviously we still have reduced capacity on public transport. So just a quick summary, really. The way forward will be using evidence through modelling and traffic levels and air quality levels, which we'll be discussing with Jaku, and that's due to be submitted by the 4th of December. Full business case on the 26th, and then a zone in place by the 29th of October 2021 at the latest, if the evidence demonstrates that is what is required. One other point to highlight in terms of consultation, the diesel ban is not moving forward now, but that was a zone that we consulted on previously. We didn't consult on a CASD previously, so we will need to consult on a CASD now, and that be built into the timelines and built into the process, which is probably beneficial because it gives us that opportunity, I suppose, to refresh everyone about what we're doing and give a good explanation of what changes are and what we'll be proposing to do. So that will be a necessary part of the scheme as well. So just very quickly to run through the recommendations. The Cabinet is asked to agree that a non-charging solution is preferred outcome if the evidence supports it and if we don't need a zone. Just noting what the new direction requires of us, authorising the Chief Executive Officer to seek further funding should it be required from JECU, and it's quite possible that actually we'll need less than what they've awarded us if we only do a small CASD, for example, in the central area. Approving the public consultation, which will be a minimum of 6 weeks, and also for the Chief Exec in consultation with the Mayor to proceed with make operational decisions regarding the full business case, which will be considered by Cabinet by the 26th of February 2021. So that's where we are. There's quite a bit in there, so I imagine there'll be a few questions, and I can also perhaps refer to some other documents if needed, and maps to show people the areas we've been talking through.
Right, thank you, Adam. Yeah, I see you, Claire. So you were first, and then Anthony.
Thanks. Adam, I'm just wondering, there's a few issues around the fact that you've closed access to Baldwin Street and you closed Bristol Bridge. It sort of means that you can't get to the Bristol Old Vic Theatre at the moment, or to Welsh Back. And so I've Googled how to get to the Old Vic Theatre, and it still takes me over Bristol Bridge, which would then give me a ticket. So I was wondering how much conversation you've had with the Old Vic and with the businesses along Welsh Back, and actually, just as an aside, how do I get there?
Just unmute myself. I'm just pulling something up. I assume I can share screen, yeah. So this is the access map that we've produced, which is on the website. So access to that part of the city, i.e. the kind of Queen Square, Old Vic area, is now via Redcliffe Bridge, Redcliffe Way. So obviously differing levels of ease depending on where you're coming from in the city.
If you're coming from North Bristol, that's now a complete nightmare.
So if you're coming from, say, the A38, your route would be down Bond Street via Old Market, and then via kind of counter slip through this way to Redcliffe Bridge to access there, which is not too different to how it would be previously. Obviously, if you're coming from the Clifton direction, there's the option of going via the James Barton, or there's the option of coming along the south of the river along Coronation Road and accessing from the south.
And Coronation Road is, that's not, at peak times, that's not easy.
Yeah, I do appreciate that. I think the other point I would make about that closure and the various changes, the improvements that we've delivered. So the cycle routes along Park Row, Perry Road up and Magdalen Street, the cycle route from Lewinsmead, which links through to the city centre cycle route, the additional buses on the 2A route, which come down White Ladies Road from that direction. They are all mitigating that lack of accessibility. So yes, we appreciate it makes it more difficult for car drivers, but there has also been a number of measures provided for people to use alternative modes to access that area.
So I'm just a bit confused, because at the moment we're not supposed to be using public transport unless we really have to. So that means to access that area, you either have to walk, cycle, or get a taxi. Which, yes, is great for air quality, but I'm just wondering how much conversation have you had with the businesses around there about the impact?
So it's an experimental TRO, the purpose of that being that you implement it and then effectively you're doing the consultation over those first 6 months. So we've done a fair bit of engagement with businesses beforehand, and we're doing further engagement with businesses during the closure.
So have you spoken to the Old Vic? Because clearly during this 6-month period, that theatre can't open anyway. But when it can reopen, that's likely to be past your consultation period.
So I don't know every business
so
that we've
what conversations?
I don't know every don't know every conversation that we've had with every business. I know we have talked to the Old Vic in general, because we've had discussions with them about the closure of King Street to enable the people to put the benches in the street and such like. So they are operating and they are engaging with us in general. But I don't know if they've specifically responded to this.
Happy that so are they happy about the change of access?
As I say, I haven't seen a detailed response from them, so I don't know exactly what their view.
I seem to. Okay, well, I sort of think that's. I mean, I'm a trustee of the Old Vic, and if we're not careful, it will go bust. And to put in another hurdle for them may actually, just be a bridge too far. Or a closure of too far. So I'll leave that with you, but also the issue at the moment is that Google will take you over a bridge. And so that needs to be addressed before you start issuing people with fines.
Yeah, so we won't be issuing fines straight away. We'll probably be issuing letters for kind of 3 to 4 weeks. I'm just looking at Google Maps, and it does show those routes as all closed at present. We do liaise with them, and they take information from our road reports. So that shouldn't be the case anymore. Where it's
at the moment. Sorry, but at the moment, when I type in, I want to get from home to the Old Vic, it takes me over Bristol Bridge.
Right.
Which is, is closed.
Okay.
So that you need to do something about that. Otherwise, you can have people inadvertently in a pickle.
Yeah, okay. I'll ask the team to have a look at that. We do have extensive signage, and as I say, we'll be issuing warning letters to people for several weeks in advance.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Before I go to you, Anthony, can I just ask just to get a bit of clarification, because the paper that went to Cabinet in November showed 116 million pounds of capital spend. The paper that's coming now shows 3.6 million of revenue spend and 11.6 million of capital. And I feel as though I'm missing a linkage. Is there any connection between the two? Does this proposal replace everything that came on the 5th of November? Is it in addition to? What's the background to the cost of the potential cost of the total proposal?
So this is the new scheme. This is the latest update position. What this isn't is an FBC, so it's not a full business case setting out exactly what the scheme will be, exactly what the costs will be. So it's an update on where we are. We've been awarded 12 million by government to develop and deliver the medium CAS C, and also we have the revenue money for doing all of the work. So that's kind of ring fenced. The work that we're doing now will revisit the scheme and come up with a revised scheme, and then we will have a revised cost for what the scheme will be to agree with JACU. So if we, for example, ended up doing just a small zone in the centre of town, that would have a different cost to doing a medium-sized zone and a small zone. There are also costs in the November report for things like M32 Park and Rides and the scrappage scheme. Those sorts of things will be added back into the costs when the FBC is drawn up.
Right. So effectively, the financial aspect of that paper is put to one side until it's recalculated.
Yeah, we're just utilising the funding that we've been given by JACU at present to develop the scheme and keep it moving forwards.
Right. Okay. I'll come back with some more questions later, but Anthony, over to you. And then Steve.
Thanks for that intervention, Jeff. So I'll now ask my question number 2. It seems to me that much of what's been going on with Bristol Bridge and some of the other active travel developments has come out of the same pot that was going to become part that was going to be the clean air zone pot. Is that correct, Adam?
No. No, so the work that's been going on in Bristol Bridge and the other stuff around the centre of town, that has been funded by the Emergency Active Travel Fund. So the Emergency Active Travel Fund is a new pot of money that the government announced a couple of months ago. WECA was awarded 840,000 from the first tranche. The bids are in for the second tranche at the moment. We're expecting WECA to be awarded somewhere in the region of 3 million for the second tranche. So it should be a total to Bristol of somewhere around £2 million from the Emergency Active Travel Fund.
Okay, thank you for that. Now I understand better. I'm very supportive of what is clearly a smarter, I would say a much more intelligent, sustainable solution here. And I've made it very clear that I welcome what I've been hearing over the last 3 or 4 days. So well done, everybody. It's sad that it's taken a pandemic partly to get us to this position, and that's regrettable. What I'm interested to know is there any more opportunity for this money that's out there going into more sustainable solutions, long-term alternative active solutions, rather than going into a zone which is just going to be full of signs and smart technology and bleeps and finding systems and all the rest? Can we move that money? Is there any opportunity to move that funding around?
So it's all very dependent on the timeframes, and as you know, with government, you get pots from different areas that have different labels on them. So in terms of the sustainable funding, I think there's actually going to be quite a lot coming this way anyway. So WECA have allocated £10 million to support the LC WIP plan. And we'll be looking to get funding from that pot to extend the work that we've been doing with the Emergency Active Travel Fund. The government has also announced that it's going to be putting out 1.7 billion across the country for walking and cycling schemes. So again, we'll be expecting to secure quite a substantial amount from that. And we also have a pot of around 20 to 30 million that WECA have allocated for public transport schemes. And again, we're looking to get into that for things like, so Bristol Bridge, we've done effectively with the Emergency Active Travel Fund, but it's not the finished scheme. We want to do that better, so it's better for pedestrians, etc. So we will look to that pot maybe for delivering that and delivering the longer term public transport improvements. In terms of the clean air zone funding, JACU will want it spent on things that deliver clean air, and they will want that based on very kind of evidenced, detailed things. So, you know, we have always had in our bid a number of walking and cycling improvements and things like that. It's very hard to show in the way that JACU want things modelled to show the benefits of those sorts of schemes, because they're longer term and they get people changing their modes rather than a very detailed traffic model. So I think it'd be quite hard to persuade JACU to change what they will give us funding for. We will obviously do that if we can. There are lots of other pots that the DFT are bringing forward that will enable us to do a lot more work on this front. And I think, you know, whilst it has taken a pandemic, I suppose that has given everyone a slightly different perspective on what is achievable and what is deliverable and what is acceptable, and that counts with the public as well. So I think there is certainly opportunity to do a lot more of that sort of work and to accelerate things a lot more than we would have done otherwise, and make good use of the funding that's becoming available. And the modelling and the testing we're doing is about seeing how far we can push that approach without a kind of very heavy hammer approach of a charging zone.
Okay, that sounds like a very good answer, and that's the way I'd like to see things going, because it seems to me that if something is better in the longer term, even if it's somewhat more intangible, it should be something that has a very good credibility rating, and therefore should be, you know, fairly high up the persuadability scale. But let me change tack a bit. It seems to me from the report that you don't believe that the reduction in traffic, particularly cars, is likely to be sustained. You even said in your speech that your presentation that the numbers had come up again. Have you any estimates of that. I mean, clearly that's something that's got to be modelled. It seems to me that it's not necessarily the number of cars overall, but the cars that contribute at the worst times, which are the rush hours, to the worst places. And the smart moves are to try and reduce the cars at the worst times in the worst places, some of which I know you're already doing. But are you also modelling for changed work patterns in the future, and maybe even changed school runs in the future?
So I'll just find the right email. This is the latest or most recent traffic count information that we had. So what these lines are showing is the ones that are highest, and you see with the two peaks, they are pre-COVID traffic volumes, and this is the traffic volume across the whole city that our Scoot transport system picks up. So these more recent lines then are the ones that are more much more recent, and what it's showing us is our off-peak traffic volumes are getting very close to what they used to be, but our peak time traffic volumes are still 20-30% lower than they were.
Yeah.
Now, what's happening in the middle here, we're not entirely sure, because they're not going to be the same trips that were happening before. People are doing different things. So is it that more people are driving to shops during the day because they're working from home and such like? We still don't fully understand why this bit is still high and the other bits are much lower. Having the peaks lower is helpful, because that's when you get the biggest problems, and therefore you're designing for a slightly smaller problem, I suppose. And what we've tried to do with the schemes that we've enacted is to capture this kind of spare capacity here in these peak times, so that when the traffic builds up again, it doesn't have the space to fill up, because to some extent traffic fills up the space that you let it fill up. So what's going to happen in future, I'm not really sure, to be honest. It's a difficult one. I think we'll see changes to traffic patterns. I think more people will work from home. Will the traffic change throughout the day? It's what we'll look at with the sensitivity tests and the kind of monitoring approach. Sorry, Mike, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. It was really just to build on your point about the uncertainty. The inherent uncertainty of what's likely to happen as people get used to the new normal is really why we wanted to go for this test and learn approach. It seemed to us, to be honest, to be a bit silly to invest huge sums of money in a scheme now when there is so much uncertainty over how people will adjust to their lives going forward. So as Adam has said, there is a lot of uncertainty, but there is also an opportunity. There's an opportunity to capture that capacity, and as Adam has described earlier, make sure that it's not consumed by people getting back in their cars as far as possible. And to some extent, this is an opportunity for the city. It's an opportunity for the people of the city to change their travel behaviour in the light of what's now happening. So, but my main point, Chair, was just to say, that uncertainty is why, in our view, this is a good approach. Let's see what happens. Let's monitor really carefully, and let's come up with a scheme that actually works with how the city is adapting to a post-COVID world.
I agree with all that, particularly with the throwing away the money on something that's now going to go from October 21 until sometime in 23. I mean, it's a very small period of time at which to be throwing huge amounts of money on stuff that you're digging holes in the ground and sticking up signs and inelegant stuff and all the rest all around the city. I'm very concerned about that. But the fact is that if we are now contemplating the different types of zones, why did we not see those as realistic alternatives to the diesel ban in the first instance? They all seem to be a lot more credible. And now we've been forced to do it. We seem to be doing it almost without a murmur.
So I think we did consider all of the various options. There are pluses and minuses to each different scheme. Certainly the medium CAS-D was considered to have too big an impact on certain households, and it wasn't as effective at getting compliance as the diesel ban was. I think one thing that became apparent kind of before lockdown when we tested what a small d would look like, because we wanted to understand what the fallback option might be if, for example, a diesel ban couldn't be enacted by government, was actually a small d was more effective than a big D, because the big D actually encouraged people to drive through it, because once they paid, they might as well. Whereas the small d gave people the option of going past the zone, so therefore they weren't driving into those most polluted areas. So so the small d that was a slightly surprising result, I suppose, that we weren't necessarily expecting that it would be more effective than a larger zone. When we do the modelling, we are going to look at things like, could we just have one for private cars? Could we just have one for the commercial vehicles? Do we need to cover both? I think the one kind of down point, I suppose, of the measures that we're taking at the moment is they reduce traffic volumes, but they don't reduce the types of traffic, if you like. So you get a general reduction in traffic, but you lose just as many polluting vehicles as you lose non-polluting vehicles to some extent, whereas obviously a zone targets very much the more polluting vehicles.
And if you have a smaller zone, traffic goes past it through my ward, for example, which I don't feel too happy about. So there's some demerits there. Look, I've got a load of questions. I'm going to stop now, but Jeff, if there is time, I would like to come back with a few more, if I may. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Adam.
So I've got Steve and then Paula.
Thanks, Jeff. So I suppose, I mean, this is complex, obviously very complex modelling, and I admire the fact you're able to do this modelling like this. But I suppose what I would say is there's lots of moving parts in this. So, for example, many of the changes that have been made to date, as I understand it, are experimental and therefore effectively temporary. And we've got a hard deadline for a business case. So presumably at some stage,
I'm waiting to see if you're coming back, Steve.
or then we will have to decide which option we're going to go for, presuming, and we then later decide the first question.
We lost a large part of you then, Steve. Steve, are you hearing us? All right, in which case, Paula, if I go to you and we'll see if Steve can make contact with us again. Paula, you're muted.
Just, I suddenly flashed up and said I only had 2 minutes left to my battery. So I had to go find the charger. Well, I wanted to say, yes, I mean, the alacrity with which the Emergency Active Travel Fund was used and for this purpose of enabling clean air has got to be admired. I suppose in a way the questions that I have are about how do you hold the line, because from my reading of social media, a lot of people think that these measures have been put in for social distancing, and a lot of it's very ugly. So in September, when everybody goes back to normal and schools are going back, there are going to be a lot of people saying, well, just take this stuff away. We don't have so much social distancing. And the message about the clean air, I don't think that has really, they've not really joined up on that. So it's a question really about messaging. So can we be aware of the fact that you're really going to need to change the message to make people understand the benefits of the systems? And also, I mean, there's no money for pretty at the moment. So at what point, can you have a timeline of when we'd be able to take away the bollards and take away the wands and make things look better so that you can sell to the citizens a picture of, a much more beautiful city? And also, as Anthony was saying, not having huge, big cameras and signs and stuff like that, they're all really big advantages. And the other question I wanted to ask about was, you talked about the sort of phase 2 sensitivity testing, and you mentioned a date in that I didn't quite get down. So could you just tell me a little bit more about that again?
Yeah, sure. So the modelling has to be sent to JACU on 4th of December. So that will be the final modelling that we will have done. So the sensitivity testing will agree with Jackie beforehand exactly what they want. So we're talking to them throughout the process, and what they've sent is a deadline for when we submit our final modelling results to them, and that's the 4th of December. So we're in the middle of stage 2 at the moment, and that was due to be about 6 weeks. So when that completes, we'll then talk to Jackie about what it's showing, agree what sensitivity tests we want to do, and then that model, which takes longer, will be run, and we'll get that to them by the 4th of December.
Okay. So the other point then, because as you said, the bridge is closed under an experimental traffic ordering. So you might get a whole load of negative responses. And how do you hold that?
I don't look like such a weirdo. So yeah, it's an experimental TRO. I think the initial experiences we had, it's working reasonably well. Obviously, we will listen to the comments that people have in terms of access and such like. So it's not nailed down. The implementation date for the zone is October 21. So we do have some time between the completion of Bristol Bridge ETRO, which is a 6-month period. So it is sort of February time for when we'll be making a decision. Although obviously we have to get the FBC in by that stage, but we'll have an idea from the modelling as to what the impacts are likely to be. They are, semi-temporary schemes. So we're going to be doing in tranche 2, making some of them more permanent. So if you look at like Upper Magdalen Street, Marlborough Street through there and through the Triangle, that will involve replacing some of the ones with more kind of permanent, slightly better looking ones, which I know isn't promising a huge amount, but there's limits to what the government will let us spend the funding on. We're then going to be working up how we turn them into permanent schemes. So as part of the next tranche, if you like, it's maybe doing the permanent works around some of the junctions and the bus stops, and then making the ones more for kind of rugged and better designed, and then we'll be coming back to make the schemes permanent as we get the further funding from government. So I think if you look at something like Upper Magdalen Street, it's probably going to be 2 to 3 years for the scheme to be at its final stages, and that's kind of how long a scheme like that would normally take. It's just we've kind of skipped a whole load of phases and stuck something in to secure the space. And a lot of what we've done with that emergency active travel fund is securing space, if you like, to put these measures in.
Yeah. So I'll just go back to the basic point, which I think is it's to do with messaging. It is to make sure that people understand that there's the dual purpose, not just about social distancing and widening the paths, but it is also a way of enabling, clear air quality, better air quality, and getting that message across so people will accept it rather than try to reject it because it looks so temporary and quite ugly.
Yeah.
Okay. Otherwise,
we will do a lot more of that messaging with the second tranche. We've got much more time to engage with people. So when we're talking to people about potential point closures, we'll be able to do actual engagement and consultation rather than just turning up and putting things in place and then talking to people afterwards.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks for all the hard work.
Thank you, Paul. Steve, we'll give you another try now.
Very, very sorry about that. I'm on the phone now. Backup devices. So sorry, I'm not sure how much you heard, but my basic question is: there's lots of moving parts, including the fact that a number of the current changes are temporary. What happens if we put in the business case, including the impact of these temporary items, and then we later decide we don't want the temporary items? That's my first question.
So we are still developing the CAS-C and the CAS-D. Either way, so we're moving that forward as a scheme. So if all of these temporary measures get removed in 2 months' time, that scheme will still be moving forward, and if that's what the modelling shows we need, that will still be deliverable in the time frame that we need to deliver it in. There is a difficult time in there around when we're preparing the FBC, having had these measures in only for 3 to 4 months, and that there's going to need to be discussions about how likely we are to keep them. I think by that time we should be getting a much better idea of what the traffic impacts are. I think to date probably the only one that's causing us real issues is the Haymarket Lewins Mead. The others seem to be working reasonably well, and we're going to make some changes to that scheme to improve it slightly. So it's working reasonably well. I'm not convinced there'll be a enormous increase in traffic when the schools go back, particularly in the areas we're talking about, because we're talking about those kind of central parts of the city. I think there will be some increase, but it's something we're going to have to bear with. And I think one thing to bear in mind here, if I was doing something like Bristol Bridge in normal times and waiting to see whether the effects were acceptable or not, I would wait at least 6 months. So you need traffic to adjust. You need people to change their habits. That 6 months is going to be kind of February time, and that is going to be a little bit challenging with the full business case paper. We'll just have to manage that process and ensure that we're still bringing forward the charging zones so that we have the fallback option.
But just to be clear, Adam, so whatever horse we decide to ride when we put in the full business case, we're then committed to that horse, so to speak.
Yes, we will be carrying on doing the monitoring and the kind of traffic modelling, and we'll be discussing with JACU throughout the process is to exactly how we look at those trigger points, because we could effectively have a scheme all there and ready to go in October of 2021, but be doing the evidence that we're getting from our traffic cameras and our pollution monitors are showing that we don't need it. You don't have to switch it on at that point, and that will all be part of the discussion with JACU around the full business case.
Fine. My last question is, the 11.6 million, is that already in our account?
Yeah,
it is. Okay. All right. Thanks, Jeff.
But it's it's there for us to draw down. Effectively, we have the funding. I think they've sent it over to us.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Jeff.
So, Adam, if I can just ask a few questions. Does the modelling that you've done give any indication of the business flow between North and South Bristol and what your proposed changes will do to that business flow?
No, it's not that detailed. So the modelling has destinations and it has a huge volume of traffic in it, and it moves that traffic around based on the decisions that people make. I can't say that there's a reduction or increase in business flow on certain routes. We can just look at general traffic flows on those routes.
Okay, so one point is I am concerned about the impact on business flow across the city. But I also just wanted to clarify on pavement widening, because I understand in the centre of town where roads have been narrowed and you're reducing the flow of traffic. In my ward, for example, the pavement widening hasn't taken out, for the most part, flows of traffic. It's taken out parking spaces, which has a separate impact, but does not necessarily reduce vastly the number of cars on the roads. Is it intended that those temporary pavement widenings for social distancing will be retained on a permanent basis?
Only if communities want them. So they are different types of schemes. So the ones in the centre of town are about providing people with alternative ways to get around and removing some of that space for general traffic flow. The ones in local communities, like in your areas in Lees and Westbury-on-Trim, they were more about providing wider pavements on a temporary basis whilst we had queues outside shops. So now that you've got people wearing face masks and more like 1 metre social distancing, we're quite happy to review the pavement widening that has gone on in those areas. If people like it, we can leave the bollards there for a bit longer. We're not going to be able to put anything nice in for a while. But if people want it removed, then we're quite happy to have those discussions. Because we think now you're not getting the queuing on pavements. It's easier for people to get around, so there's less of an issue.
I mean, your team have been fantastic at engaging with us and with the community through that. So that's been really appreciated. I think there is a problem to which I can't see the answer, because there are many who have appreciated the change. Yeah. There is a real problem. My ward has the oldest population in the city, according to the last census, or oldest proportion. And those without blue badges are finding that actually it's easier for them to go out of town shopping than it is for them to shop at the local shops where they would originally have parked, walked with their shopping to their car. They now can't. So I'm just flagging up there is an issue there. And I would also flag up the point Claire was mentioning about how we isolate North Bristol from the cultural centre of the city, how we isolate other parts of the city from that. And I think it's just a plea that I understand changes have got to happen to improve air quality. I don't need any convincing of that. I do think we've got to be seriously careful about what those changes are and what the unintended consequences might be, because we need our retail traders, we need our tourist attractions, we need our hospitality trade, because that's creating jobs that employ our residents. So I just have a concern that what we're doing as a short-term expedience might not actually bring about the best of outcomes. Anthony, you wanted to come back anyway, so now's your chance. You're muted, Anthony.
That's it. Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
That's good. Just to pick up on your last point before I make the one point I've got left. If you go to many wonderful cities in Europe, and in fact, some in this country as well, you're not all the time bothered by fast-moving cars. It doesn't inhibit their business. Why should it inhibit ours? It's just a different mindset. And ultimately, that will be a better way of using certainly the inner parts of our city. So I think we're heading in the right direction on this, that's the way I think we've got to go. My question was, and I think, Adam, you won't be able to answer this, but I'd be interested to know if this work is maybe in hand. One of the reasons, obviously, for an increase in, or more cars than we would expect right now, is because people are not using buses because of the problems of social distancing and all the rest. Do we have are we able to make any assessment of the relationship between those increased cars and the amount that the buses are being used?
Not really. We know what the patronage percentages are on buses. It's kind of 30 to 50%. The capacity is about 50%, and I think we're getting around 30 to 40% patronage compared to previous levels.
Right.
So 30 to 40% of what used to use it. I've noticed there's a lot fewer cyclists in town, it seems to me, despite all the efforts we're making at providing more cycle routes. So when I cycle through town, I see fewer bikes locked up. It's people making different trips, most people, I suppose, that are working from home tend to be in office-based jobs. Those office-based jobs may have car parking, for example. It's really hard. We just don't have that volume or that level of information as yet. I kind of agree. We need to be giving people the other options and the other ways of getting around town, so that we don't have cars driving everywhere. The one difficulty I would say we've had is that we've done all the kind of nasty, difficult bits without getting the nice bits back for it. So usually if you closed Bristol Bridge to traffic, you do a whole urban realm scheme around it so that you feel those benefits, you feel the upgrade to the streets and the abilities for cafes to spill out and a much nicer environment. We haven't had that money yet. Now we're looking to secure that money in future schemes, so we don't perhaps have the benefits coming through, but we hopefully will get them. In terms of the people volumes, it's just really hard to say what people are doing differently. And I think what's interesting is there is really no evidence that suggests using public transport is particularly problematic when compared to things like pubs. And from what I've read, that's partly because people don't generally talk on the bus or on the train, whereas in a pub you're conversing, and it's the expulsion of material, if you like, that leads to the thing spreading. So I feel that was a very ill-advised thing for the government to tell people not to use public transport. I think with the social distancing that we've got in place, where we've got about 50% capacity, I think that's quite a good setup, and actually we should be making the case that makes it safe to use public transport to encourage people to use it.
But let me just finish this one. In order to make your case for not having to have a zone, in other words, in order to make your case for not having so many more polluting vehicles, surely you've got to make a case for how much the buses are taking the strain and could take more strain with certain increased inducements or better service or whatever, but that exercise has got to be done presumably sooner rather than later, hasn't it?
So I guess the assumption in the modelling will be that buses are not locked down and therefore not social distancing. So they are carrying their normal volume of people. So we kind of have to make that assumption, because otherwise we've got no chance. Really, it's it's really difficult to model otherwise. I think we need to make an assumption that buses will be back to normal capacity at that point in time.
Okay, that's a fair point, and thank you very much for your very smart responses to my emails in the past. You've been very quick to come back to me. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Okay. Claire, then I think I'll bring this to a conclusion.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on your last statement, Adam, about it being safe to go on public transport, and you don't know why the government has advised that. Are you speaking from public health advice on that? Because that's quite a sweeping statement. So the Director of Public Health modelled that.
So the point I was making is, with the changes that are in place, with the social distancing that's in place on buses, that's the point of that being there, is to make it safe for people to use that public transport. So you can't sit next to each other, etc. That's to make public transport safe for people to use. That's the point I'm making.
Okay, it's just that obviously it's not just breathing; it's surfaces as well.
Yeah.
And so I just am concerned that you've made a statement there which I'm not sure is backed up by the science. And I just wondered where you got that from.
So the surfaces is a much easier thing to deal with in terms of hand washing and using hand gels, whereas airborne particles obviously are more difficult to deal with. You can't see them, you can't deal with them in the same way. So the point I'm making is that what the government did at the very start was basically tell people not to use public transport anymore, and that message has stuck, and that's a problem, when actually the changes that public transport operators have put in place to make their vehicles safe have made their vehicles much safer. So to put that messaging out there that people shouldn't be using public transport is problematic, and we need to change that messaging to say, actually, we've put social distancing on buses, using appropriate measures in terms of washing your hands and such like. We shouldn't be considering buses to be unsafe.
And so, and you've had that view confirmed by our Director of Public Health.
But if they were considered unsafe, it wouldn't be.
Have you had that? You have.
I haven't specifically talked to the Director of Public Health, no.
So okay, so that's an assumption by a transport department, not by our Director of Public Health, who is responsible for the health of the city.
So this is based on discussions that happen on a national level with the bus companies and the government and the health departments about social distancing on buses and what's safe and what's appropriate.
Okay, I'm just not convinced that statement is backed up by the science just yet. I mean, I get where you're coming from, but I would just be wary of making that sort of.
Adam, can I suggest that we share with Councillor Hiscott and other members what that kind of DFT position is on buses? So it'd be worth getting hold of that and sharing it with
I think that's, yeah, I'd quite like to see that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that will be helpful, because I can see the logic in what Adam's saying, but I think it would just be helpful if we could have that confirmation.
I mean, I do, I spend my day contacting people that have got coronavirus, so I've sort of got a vested interest that I'd actually like to contact less people.
I'm going to bring this one to a close, but I just want to check, Celia or Brenda, have you got anything you want to you want to contribute? Yeah, Celia.
I'd just like to say, Adam, would you be happy for us to email you direct? I mean, I've got a very specific question. It's very locally focused, and I thought it's probably not really for this meeting, but it might be useful.
If it's kind of regarding the active travel fund measures, the best place is the transport engagement address, just because my inbox is full with all sorts of stuff, and I want to make sure you get a response from the appropriate person. If it's related to the CAS, then if you send it to me, I'll forward it on to one of the team.
Okay, thank you. I didn't want to overload individuals, but yes, I'll do that. Thanks.
Brenda.
It was really just to say that it's very interesting listening to all this. Living in northwest Bristol, I do have some concerns about how we're going to get around to the other side of the city. But I'll wait and see if your map helps out with any of that. And on the pavement issue, we haven't had anything done about our pavements because we've probably got the widest pavements around the shopping centre of anywhere in the city. So I'm quite happy with the pavements at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Right, Adam, thank you very much for your time and your very detailed and comprehensive responses. Really appreciated. Before I bring this item to a close, members, I just really want to know whether there is a view that we should be putting a comment into Cabinet, or whether we take the view that with Adam and Mike here, and indeed Nicola here as well, hearing what we've got to say, whether we have done sufficient. So it's really what do members do? Steve, you're happy without making a statement? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, Jeff. I think we've had a good discussion. We've been clarifying points. The officers have been very helpful. I'm happy that we don't put in a separate statement unless you feel we need to.
Yeah. Is everyone else of the same?
Yeah, I concur with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I would like to raise the concerns about talking to businesses more about the impact of this going forward.
Chair, if I can just say I'm happy to take that away and review with Adam, what we're doing about that, and I will explicitly make sure we speak directly to the Old Vic.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I think there are issues that we might all individually want to make to Cabinet, but I think collectively from our point of view, and particularly with the explanation that all of this at this stage is still developmental, I think probably we're better to leave it until the business case is developed and see where we might contribute at that point. But Adam, thank you again for your time. Really appreciated. Thank you.
Right.
Okay, so item 11 on the agenda is the Cabinet meeting on the 1st of September. I think we've covered the items that the Osm Leeds considered needed to be discussed at this meeting. Can I just check whether anyone else has any points from that Cabinet meeting that they feel we should be or should have been looking at? And Nancy and Lucy are just showing off that the Lord Mayor's agenda meetings are much briefer than Osm meetings by returning. Welcome back. So my scan didn't pick up anything, and I think judging by the fact that everyone else is muted, I'm assuming members don't have anything else they wish to raise. Okay, the Mayor's forward plan is tabled as a regular item. Again, the Leeds have looked at that at the beginning of August, and we're due the next update, Lucy, within the next 3 or 4 days, I think.
Yes, that's right. It's next week, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, so I don't believe there's anything to raise on the forward plan. No. Okay. No minutes from WECA, and the WECA forward plan for scrutiny is copied in for members. So I believe that brings this meeting to a conclusion. Our next meeting is scheduled for the 5th of October, immediately before the Cabinet meeting, I believe the next day. So without further ado, Mike, thank you for joining us. Thank you all for your time. I declare this meeting closed.
Thanks.